Hi, second grade. You're with me, and we are reading The Wild Robot. We just left off, and Roz climbed this very high mountain and was kind of peering over the land. And our narrator leaves off by saying that now the island had a new kind of life, a strange kind of life, an artificial life. And possibly in your journal, after you read that chapter, you wrote or thought a little bit about what is artificial life? What does artificial mean? And when you thought about that, I hope that you thought fake. Artificial is not real life. Sometimes scientists will talk about artificial intelligence. So AI is artificial intelligence, and I think that that is something that Roz is. She is artificial intelligence, a fake brain, fake thoughts. She's not human, but as we'll see, she's about to do some very human things. Chapter 10, The Reminder. I should remind you, reader, that Roz had no idea how she had come to be on that island. She didn't know that she had been built in a factory and then stored in a warehouse before crossing the ocean in a cargo ship. She didn't know that a hurricane had sunk the ship and left her crate floating in the waves for days until it finally washed ashore. She didn't know that she had been accidentally activated by those curious sea otters. So as Roz looked out onto the island, it never even occurred to her that she might not belong there. As far as Roz knew, she was home. Chapter 11, The Robot Sleeps. Roz stood at the peak and watched the sun sink behind the ocean. She watched shadows slowly spread over the island and up the mountainside. She watched the stars come out one by one until the sky was filled with 1,000,000 points of light. It was the first night in the robot's life. She activated her headlights, and suddenly bright shafts of light were beaming out of her eyes and illuminating the whole mountaintop. Too bright, so she dimmed them. Then she turned them off and sat in the darkness and listened to the chorus of nighttime chirps. After a while, our robot's computer brain decided it was a good time to conserve energy, and so she sat and anchored her hands to the rocks. Her non-essential programs switched off, and then, in her own way, the robot slept. Chapter 12, The Storm. I'm going to show you the picture before I read. Roz felt safe up on the mountaintop, and so she spent the next few days and nights perched on the peak. But everything changed one afternoon when a low flying cloud crept up the mountain, and Roz felt herself surrounded by white. When the world faded back into view, she noticed more clouds floating south past the island, and then she heard a deep rumble behind her. The robot turned her head around and saw the sky was filled with a swirling wall of darkness. Light flickered here and there, and more deep rumbles. A storm was approaching, and it wasn't just any storm. It was as fierce as the one that had set the cargo ship to the ocean floor. The wind picked up. The first drops of rain tapped against the robot. It was time for Roz to go. Roz unclamped her hands and began sliding down the peak. Hot sparks flew from everywhere. Her body scraped against the leaning slab of stone. So she's like skidding down that slab of stone, and as the metal is catching against the rock, sparks are flying off of her body. So like just imagine that scene in your head. You know, you've got this crazy storm coming and you've got Roz sliding down the edge of a mountain, like sparks are flying everywhere. As soon as her feet hit the soil, she was off running. The rain fell harder, the wind blew faster, lightning flashed brighter, and thunder cracked louder. So much rainwater was falling that rushing rivers and runoffs started springing up everywhere. Roz splashed down the mountain. Now, what do we know about robots? We talked a little bit about how they're metal and how they're electric. Water probably a bad thing for a robot, right? We know that from our experience. Phones don't belong in water. So we could think of Roz as like a big smartphone. So water, bad. But she should have watched where she was going. Her heavy feet slipped and tripped, and she tumbled right into a mudslide. Our robot was helpless. A river of mud whisked her downhill, slamming her onto rocks and dragging her through the bushes and sweeping her right towards a cliff. Mud was pouring off the cliff like a waterfall. Roz frantically clawed at the ground, grasping for anything she could hold on to, but the flow only carried her faster towards the edge. And just as she was about to plunge over the side, she came to a hard, sudden stop. The mud surged around her, spraying her face and pinning her against a solid thing. She blindly felt with her hands and recognized thick roots, the trunk of a pine tree. In an instant, she was pulling herself up onto the branches. The wind whipped across the mountainside, and Roz heard a familiar thunk. Pine cones pelting her body, but she didn't mind them. She was just happy to be safe from the mud flow. The robot locked her arms and legs around the tree and waited for the storm to blow over. Chapter 13, The Aftermath. Daybreak, and the storm had passed, but the sounds of the water were everywhere. The air was filled with the dripping sounds of mountain runoff and sloshing sounds of flooded streams, and then a very different sound. It was the clanging sound made when a robot slips on a wet rock. There are quite a few clangs this morning. There were quite a few clangs that morning. As Roz worked her way downhill, she scanned the aftermath of the storm. Giant mounds of mud and debris had formed below the cliffs. The island's central river had crested its bank and spilled onto the nearby fields and forests. Some trees had been uprooted. Others were submerged, their upper branches barely poking above the floodwaters, their lower branches swarming with fish instead of birds. After such a storm, you might expect to see animal corpses scattered among the devastation, but the animals seemed to have survived just fine. Somehow they had all known that the storm was coming, and they had found shelter long before it rolled in. Lowland creatures had sought refuge on higher ground, and they waited patiently for the water to recede. Deer were wading through the flooded fields. Beavers were busy collecting. Stop with the cabinets. So my cat Nugget, suddenly loves to open and close cabinets. I'm gonna have to get some, child locks or something for the cat. Okay, where was I? Do you remember weeks ago when I used to get interrupted reading by someone in class talking or, I don't know, needing to use the bathroom? And now I'm getting interrupted by kittens. Life is weird. Others submerged, poking water floods instead of birds. Okay. Geese honked in the sky before splashing down into the watery section of the forest. Clearly, the animals were experts at survival. Clearly, the robot was not. Roz was crusted with mud and grit, so she gave herself another good cleaning. But that only revealed her dents and scratches, and they were really starting to add up. She hardly resembled the perfect robot who had appeared on the shore a week earlier. The wilderness was taking its toll on poor Roz. So she felt something like relief when she spotted a quiet hole on the side of the mountain. It looked like a safe place for a robot. She stomped across the hillside and up to the cave, but never stopped to wonder what might be lurking within. Boys and girls, what do we know about holes in the wilderness? What do you think might be hiding in there? I'm thinking anything from a fox to a bear. Let's find out. Chapter 14. the bears. That doesn't look good. Roz stomped into the cave, and then she stomped back out. Please stay away, said the robot to the two bears who were nipping at her heels. You see, when Roz stomped into the cave, she accidentally woke up a brother and a sister bear from their morning nap, which is never a good idea. To make matters worse, bears have an instinct that drives them to attack when a creature runs away, especially if the creature running away is a mysterious, sparkling monster. So as the startled bears watched Roz stomping out of their cave, they really had no choice at all. They simply had to take up the chase. Okay. So boys and girls, I am right about here, and I'm going to stop there because we're at 11 minutes. And like I said, I want to keep these videos to about 10 minutes each. That way it makes it a little bit more manageable for you at home to listen to. You can listen to a bunch of them if you want to, or you could listen to one, do something else, listen to another one. I just don't want to make like these really crazy long videos and then have you pausing and trying to find where you were. All right, I will see you next time. Have a great day.